In a bustling town, whispers spread about a bride treated cruelly by her wealthy groom. Hidden beneath the glamour of a grand festival lies a tale of injustice, strength, and an unexpected savior. When a stranger arrives, everything begins to change, and the truth threatens to shake the very foundations of the community. What secrets will the festival reveal? How far will the groom go to protect his image? And who will rise to defend the orphan bride? Stay tuned to find out and let us know where you're watching from. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In a small town, there lived a kind but lonely young woman named Grace. She had no family, no home of her own, and no one to truly care for her. Grace was an orphan, and people often overlooked her quiet strength and gentle heart. She lived her days working at the bakery, dreaming of a brighter future where she wouldn't feel so invisible. One day, to everyone's surprise, she became engaged to Stephen, a young man from a wealthy family. Stephen, however, did not choose Grace because he loved her. His parents had pressured him to marry someone they considered proper before the grand spring festival, where their family hosted the largest party of the year. Grace was seen as obedient and quiet, qualities Stephen thought would make her easy to control. As their wedding day approached, Stephen treated Grace poorly. He dismissed her feelings and mocked her for being an orphan, saying she was lucky to marry into his family. He showed off his wealth to remind her how much better he was than her. Grace kept silent, trying her best not to cry, but deep inside she wished she had someone who would see her for who she really was. The town was abuzz with excitement for the spring festival. Stephen and his family boasted about their upcoming celebration, saying it would be the grandest in years. Grace felt more and more alone as Stephen publicly embarrassed her at every turn. On the morning of the festival, a stranger arrived in town. His name was Benjamin, and he was a millionaire who had lived far away for many years. Benjamin came dressed in simple clothing, yet there was an air of wisdom and confidence about him. He quickly heard whispers of how poorly Stephen treated Grace and saw the sadness in her eyes. Benjamin didn't rush to reveal his wealth, but he decided he would not stay silent in the face of such cruelty. He stepped forward into the festival crowd, making his presence known. Benjamin stood tall in the crowd, his presence drawing curious eyes. He watched as Stephen paraded through the festival, laughing and boasting while Grace trailed behind him, her head bowed in quiet despair. Something in Benjamin's heart stirred, a deep sense of justice and empathy for Grace's struggles. The festival activities had begun, and Stephen's family was hosting grand competitions and displays of wealth. Stephen made sure to put Grace on the sidelines, refusing to let her participate. His harsh words echoed through the crowd. What could an orphan possibly bring to such a celebration? Benjamin observed silently for a while, then approached Grace when she was alone, her hands folded tightly in front of her. With a kind smile, he handed her a small package. Grace hesitated, unsure if she should accept it, but Benjamin gently reassured her with his gaze. When Grace opened the package, her eyes widened. It was a delicate bracelet adorned with tiny gems. It wasn't just beautiful, it was a symbol of encouragement and worth, something she hadn't felt in a long time. As the festival continued, Benjamin began speaking with the townsfolk. He learned more about the way Stephen treated Grace and about the town's perception of her. Quietly, he started weaving his way into the social circles, always careful not to reveal the full extent of his wealth or influence just yet. It wasn't time to make his move. Meanwhile, Stephen noticed Grace wearing the bracelet and grew suspicious. He questioned her sharply, demanding to know who had given it to her. Grace tried to explain, but Stephen interrupted her with cruel laughter, accusing her of trying to gain attention and pity. His words cut deeply, but Grace held her ground, refusing to let her tears fall in front of him. As the festival unfolded, Benjamin's quiet yet determined presence began to make waves. People started noticing the subtle shifts in behavior around Grace. While Stephen's arrogance continued to overshadow the celebrations, Benjamin took small but meaningful actions to uplift her. He praised her kindness to the townsfolk, ensuring her character was known to those who had once overlooked her. During the festival's centerpiece, a grand feast, Benjamin revealed his first plan. He approached the table where Stephen's family sat, surrounded by their wealthy guests, and openly complimented Grace for her poise and humility. His words contrasted sharply with Stephen's previous mockery, leaving the groom visibly unsettled. The guests murmured among themselves, curious about the stranger who had spoken so boldly. Grace, though overwhelmed, found herself gaining confidence. For the first time, she felt seen not as the orphan bride, but as an individual of worth. Her simple bracelet sparkled in the sunlight, a quiet reminder of Benjamin's support. Stephen, however, grew increasingly uncomfortable with Benjamin's presence. He began to scrutinize the stranger, trying to understand why he was so interested in Grace. When Benjamin offered to join one of the festival's games, a display of strength and skill, Stephen eagerly accepted, hoping to outshine him in front of the crowd. The game commenced, and Benjamin surprised everyone with his remarkable abilities. Despite his modest appearance, he proved to be a formidable competitor, earning cheers and applause. Stephen's frustration grew as he struggled to keep up. In the midst of the competition, Benjamin made a deliberate choice to highlight Grace, suggesting that she deserved recognition and admiration for her inner strength. The atmosphere of the festival grew tense as Stephen struggled to match Benjamin's skill in the competition. The crowd, once focused solely on Stephen's family, now began to talk about the mysterious stranger who had brought attention to Grace. Whispers spread about Benjamin's kindness and respect toward her, creating ripples of curiosity and admiration throughout the festival grounds. As the game concluded with Benjamin emerging victorious, Stephen's frustration was palpable. He stormed off to join his family at their private table, leaving Grace standing awkwardly among the onlookers. Benjamin noticed her discomfort and stepped forward once more. This time he encouraged Grace to walk with him, introducing her to people who had never before paid her any mind. Benjamin's subtle but deliberate efforts changed the way others saw Grace. Those who once avoided her began to see her kindness and resilience. She smiled faintly, a flicker of hope returning to her eyes as strangers offered her compliments and engaged her in conversation. Stephen's family began to take notice of the shift in the crowd's attention. They whispered among themselves, growing anxious about the stranger who seemed to be turning the tide of public opinion. Stephen, desperate to regain control, decided to plan a grand spectacle that would remind everyone of his family's wealth and dominance. He announced a surprise performance later that evening, claiming it would be the highlight of the festival. Stephen promised it would leave no doubt about who deserved the town's admiration. His arrogance blinded him to the growing wave of discontent among the people, who were beginning to see through his facade. As evening fell, the festival grounds buzzed with anticipation for Stephen's promised spectacle. The grand performance was meant to showcase his family's wealth and influence, leaving no room for anyone to doubt their dominance in the town. Stephen had spared no expense, arranging for intricate decorations, hired performers, and a display of fireworks that would light up the night sky. As the preparations unfolded, Benjamin remained calm and observant. He recognized Stephen's desperate need to regain control, and he knew this was the perfect opportunity to turn the tide even further. Benjamin decided to stay close to Grace, ensuring she felt supported amidst the chaos of the evening's events. He noticed how her quiet strength was becoming an unspoken beacon to others, and he intended to protect that newfound attention. When the spectacle finally began, Stephen stood at the center of the stage, delivering a boastful speech about his family's contributions to the town. He emphasized their wealth and power, subtly mocking those who lacked such privileges. As the fireworks exploded in vibrant colors above, the crowd cheered out of obligation rather than genuine admiration. Stephen's performance felt hollow, a display of arrogance rather than community spirit. Benjamin watched closely, waiting for the right moment to act. He knew that Stephen's elaborate show lacked heart, and the crowd was beginning to sense it. Then, as the final fireworks faded into the night sky, Benjamin stepped forward, his presence commanding the attention of everyone gathered. He didn't speak loudly or boastfully. Instead, he shared a story about kindness, resilience, and the strength found in those who faced life's hardships. Though he didn't name Grace directly, it was clear to all that his words were inspired by her journey. The crowd listened intently, their cheers replaced by thoughtful silence. Even Stephen's family shifted uncomfortably, realizing that Benjamin's words carried a truth they couldn't ignore. The festival grounds seemed to pause, as Benjamin's heartfelt story resonated deeply with the crowd. He spoke of courage in the face of adversity, of the quiet strength that often went unnoticed. His words were simple, yet profound, painting a picture of resilience and dignity that moved many to tears. Grace stood at the edge of the crowd, her head slightly raised as if she too felt the weight of his words reaching her heart. Stephen, now visibly agitated, clenched his fists. He could sense the crowd's attention slipping away from his extravagant show and turning instead toward the orphan bride he had so often ridiculed. His carefully crafted image was beginning to crumble, and he struggled to maintain his composure. Stephen's parents, seated in their place of honor, exchanged worried glances, their confidence in their son's choices shaken by the murmurs spreading through the gathering. As Benjamin finished his story, the crowd erupted into applause, not the kind reserved for grand performances, but the warm, genuine kind that comes from shared understanding. Benjamin nodded graciously and then turned toward Grace, offering her a subtle but encouraging smile. It was as if he was passing the moment to her, allowing her to step into the light she deserved. But before Grace could move or speak, Stephen marched forward, determined to reclaim the spotlight. His voice rang out over the crowd, sharp and commanding, as he accused Benjamin of meddling and questioned his intentions. Stephen demanded to know why a stranger had taken such an interest in Grace, his words laced with bitterness and jealousy. Benjamin remained calm, his expression unchanging. He looked at Stephen for a moment before responding, but rather than engaging in Stephen's aggression, he shifted his attention back to the crowd. "Actions speak louder than word," he said simply, his voice steady. The crowd's murmurs grew louder as many began to see Stephen's true nature. The crowd's whispers swelled as Stephen's outburst echoed through the festival grounds. His harsh tone and accusatory words began to paint an unflattering picture of him, one he had tried desperately to hide behind wealth and appearances. Benjamin stood firmly, his calm demeanor unshaken. Grace, standing just behind him, felt her heart pound, not from fear but from a growing sense of hope and confidence. Benjamin stepped forward slightly, his steady gaze meeting Stephen's. He raised his voice just enough for the crowd to hear, yet his tone remained measured and kind. "What I have done here today," he began, "is not about me or my intentions. It is about recognizing the value in those who have been overlooked, those who carry strength in silence and dignity in the face of hardship. The real question, Stephen, is not why I have chosen to act, but why you had chosen to belittle someone so undeserving of cruelty." The crowd fell silent, the weight of Benjamin's words sinking in. Stephen's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, an older woman from the crowd stepped forward. She was known in the town as Mrs. Caldwell, a respected elder whose words carried great influence. "He's right," she said, her voice clear and firm. "We have turned a blind eye to Grace's struggles for far too long. Stephen, your actions have been shameful." The murmur of agreement that followed was unmistakable. More townsfolk began stepping forward, sharing their own observations of Stephen's behavior and expressing support for Grace. Each word of encouragement brought a little more light to her weary heart. She felt as though the walls that had once closed in around her were starting to crumble, brick by brick. Stephen, now visibly overwhelmed, tried to dismiss the crowd's words, but their voices only grew louder. Even his parents, who had always stood by him, began to shift uncomfortably in their seats, realizing the magnitude of the situation. Meanwhile, Grace stood still, her hands clasped tightly together as she processed the unexpected wave of support surrounding her. The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, evolving into a wave of support for Grace. Each voice that rose up against Stephen's treatment of her chipped away at his facade. His parents, embarrassed and desperate to salvage their family's reputation, finally stood to address the crowd. With forced smiles, they announced their intention to step back from the public eye for a while, to reflect on the values they had once neglected. Stephen, abandoned even by his parents, stood frozen in disbelief. His once lofty arrogance dissolved into silence as the crowd turned their backs on him, now focused entirely on Grace. She stood there, her heart pounding as she absorbed the moment. For the first time, she was no longer the orphan bride, but someone truly seen and valued. Benjamin stepped forward once again, this time extending his hand to Grace. "You've shown more strength and kindness than many could muster," he said softly, his eyes kind. With that, he turned to the crowd and proposed a toast, not to wealth or status, but to resilience, to humanity, and to people like Grace who deserve better. The festival that had once been a stage for Stephen's arrogance transformed into a celebration of Grace's spirit. The townsfolk rallied around her, promising to rewrite the way they treated one another. For Grace, this moment marked the beginning of a new chapter, a life where she could finally feel at home, loved by a community that had opened its heart to her. As the night stretched on and the festivities carried a new warmth, Grace felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Beside her, Benjamin smiled, not seeking recognition, but content that he had helped bring justice and light to someone who truly deserved it.